Hello everyone and welcome to another devlog video for the Animal Behavior Kit Pro. In this video, I'd like to show you guys my progress with the new pathing system. So a little bit of history here. The original pathing system that I made for ABK, which is still currently live, basically used a spline and then it spawned specific waypoints at each spline point, as you can see here. And then the animal would go from waypoint to waypoint. But it would go so in a straight line. So in the old system, this animal would go here and then would go in a straight line here and then in a straight line here, and you get the point. There was no concept of trying to follow the curvature of the spline. It was just literally picking that location and just going there. Later on, when I worked on the NPC manager system, I started with the system from ABK, but then at that point I improved it. And now the NPCs actually follow the spline. So one of my goals for 1.4 was, of course, to upgrade the pathing system and port some of that original code from NPCM and then obviously improve it. So as you can see here, I've done quite a bit of changes. I have a brand new task that is going to handle the pathing code. The old one is still there, but we're not going to use that anymore. And now, as you can see, the paths have an actual mesh, and this is just to visualize it as well. And each path, you can see have a path selected here. If you look here, it has a new path ID. Whether the path is looped or not, you can show or hide the spline. And then you see you can have some pathing options here. And this is just for visualization purposes, right? You can hide it or you can show it. You can have the path hidden. And you have the mesh and the materials here. Pretty standard stuff. The idea would be that in your level, you'll go ahead and lay down a bunch of different possible paths for your animals. So this would be path 1, for example. This one would have path 2. This one would have path 3, etc. And then the animals would use these IDs to find the nearest path and then just kind of walk it, right? So each path has a specific ID. And now if I click on this bear that I have here, and this one would have their own behavior follow path. I go down here to the follow path behavior struct, and you can see that we have some new options. The first thing is going to be a selection method for the path. So we have 3. We have specific, sequential, or random. So specific would be that you have a path ID array here. You'll specify an ID, and it will just look for the nearest path with that ID. And it's specific because it's only going to find the paths that have that ID. So in this case, path 1 is equivalent to this path right here. As you can see here, path 1. But I also have another path here that also has path 1. So that's another improvement on the system. Before, you had to actually select the instance of the path directly to the animal, but now you can just have an ID, and even with path 1 or whatever ID you give it, the animal will grab all of the paths with that matching ID and just select the closest one. So that's kind of the default behavior here. So let's go back here, and you can see that we're going to tell the animal, hey, I want you to specifically look for path 1. And then you have some additional options here like the movement update frequency and the target distance. Basically, we're going to every 0.25 seconds or whatever value you do there, we're going to grab the current distance of the animal and project 800 units forward, and that's going to be the goal so the animal can basically walk. The more frequent or the lower the number here, obviously the more accurate or fluid that animal will kind of contour on the shape, but obviously the more performance heavy it will be. So you can kind of have a happy medium there. Then you have a range here, a minimum and max of how much time the animal will wait at a waypoint. And I'm going to show you that in a second, but before, each waypoint would be basically each spline point. So you have an option here to have waypoints, and the animal would basically stop at each spline point there. And it is a range because it's going to be a random value. So between 2 and 4 seconds, for example. And then you also have a path offset range, and again, min and max. So you don't want the animal to go exactly on the spline. You can have an offset. So that will be between 0 and 500 units. 0 would be exactly on the spline, and 500 units would be to the right 500 units offset. And then we have the end of path selection. What happens when you're done with your path? And this is not being used right now. We'll probably remove it, and you'll see why in just a second. I can just use the regular path selection. There's no need for that. And these two values are for legacy purposes. If you still for some reason want to use the old system, then I will leave these values there. You can see that in the old system, you actually need to select the actual path. All right, so let's go ahead and click play and see what happens. So we have this animal here. Oh, and one last thing. For the troubleshooter, I added an option now for the ABK troubleshooter to increase the time dilation. And this is not only for testing purposes, but I find it super useful to visualize things. So right now, the time in-game will be 2x or 200% faster. So that's why you're going to see the animal kind of go quickly. We don't want to stay here waiting for the animal to slowly walk through the path, basically. So, all right, if we click on simulate, you can see that the animal found this path, and he picked a offset, and it's just going around the path. And when it hits the end, it's just basically going to go back. So the animal is basically going up and down this path because we said that the animal should find a specific path ID, and once it gets there, it'll just kind of stick to it. So you can see in this case, the animal is just going up and down, and it is following the curvature of the spline, which is obviously the main point of having this new system, that you can have much smoother movement. And this looks choppy because I have this running at 2x the speed, but you get the point. But what happens if we want the animal to do more than one path, right? And that's when the next method comes into play. Obviously, that will be here. Instead of specific, we have sequential. And sequential will look at this path ID array and go obviously in sequence. So it'll start by finding path 1, but now we're going to add another one, and let's call this path 2. And path 2 is the ID of this path right here, path 2. So what we're saying is to the animal, find the closest path 1, which in this case is going to be there, and when you're done, find the closest path 2, and then go through it. And as expected, if I click play now, it found path 1. It's going to go around the path. It's going to go through the shape normally. And then at the end here, it's going to search again for all of the different path 2s in the map. In this case, there's only one. And it's going to find the closest one, and then it's going to start going through the path. And now you're going to see what happens when it gets to the end. It's going to go back to path 1 because you're at the end of the list, path 2 and path 1, and it's going to continue doing that, path 1 and 2, basically indefinitely. And you can see it found the location here, and it's going to go and go and go. So let's take this one step further. What if we want to add another one, path 3? So you can clearly see where we're going with this, and I'm going to increase the speed a little bit more. Instead of 2, let's make this like 4. And we're going to see what happens here. The animal goes to path 1, which is this one. Then path 2 is going to be this one. It's going to go through the path. And then when it gets here at the end, it's going to look for path 3, which is this little inner path right here. Exactly. And it picks this path. And when it ends here, it's going to go all the way back to path 1. Now notice what's happening here, that the animal doesn't really care about the direction of the path. You can see that we're picking the path now and we're going in the opposite direction. So that's one thing that I've kind of decided, but I'd like to hear some feedback on. In the old system, each path had an actual direction, like forward or backwards, and the animal would have to follow that direction. But the way I'm doing it now is that the animal decides the direction based on how far are each ends of the path. So for example, it's going to start with path 1 here, and it's going to go forward because it is closer to spline point 0 than spline point whatever that is. If I grab the animal and I put it here at the end and I click simulate, notice that the animal is now going backwards on the trail because it was closer to the end. So if I put the animal anywhere on the path, based on that distance, it'll pick a direction. So you can see there. So that's one thing that I'm actually not sure if that's going to be more useful, and I'd love to hear your opinion. If you were laying down these paths, would you want the animals to have a very specific direction that you can control, or do you want the animals to kind of do their own thing? Because obviously, if I have a bunch of different animals, which we're going to see at the end, they're going to pick their own directions, and that, in my opinion, would look a little bit more natural. But again, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. The other thing is waypoints. So again, waypoints before, we used to spawn a physical blueprint waypoint on the world, and that was the waypoint that was used by the AI to not only go to the location but to stop. So I've deprecated that system. And why should I spawn a specific actor that represents a spline point when I can just get the spline point's location itself, right? So that means that your level is less cluttered with blueprints, takes less memory, and is, in my opinion, more flexible. So now what we do is, I'm going to go here to waypoint options, and I'm going to expand this, and now we can generate waypoints in 3 different ways. So before, it was all points. So you would generate a waypoint, you would spawn a waypoint for every single spline point here. And you can still do that, right? So if we click on generate waypoints, notice that nothing has spawned, but we do have waypoint locations now generated, as opposed to a hard reference to an actor, we just have the location. And if we zoom down here and click on debug waypoints, you can see that we do have waypoints here. So now I'm going to go back to the animal, and I'm going to do specific, not sequential, just so we can stick to this one path. And notice that when it's specific, it'll only use index 0 of the list. So I can still leave these ones here, but it's still just going to pick path 1. So what happens when I click, and I'm going to make this a little slower. Maybe like it. Well, let's make it a 1. Fine, whatever. We'll click on simulate, and notice that the animal's walking, and when it gets close to this point, it'll stop between 2 and 4 seconds. Then it'll keep going, and then it'll reach this point here, and it'll stop. So it's not 100% accurate, because I am calculating the distance on that interval, the what is it, 0.25 interval. The slower the interval, the less accurate it's going to be. But I figure that's a nice trade-off, because again, maybe you would rather have a little bit more randomness. And you can see that it didn't stop there, because again, you could pick 0 from that range. So it's going to go up and down, and it's going to be stopping at every spline point. However, we also have another method of generating that, and that is by a pattern. So I'm adding now some more additional flexibility so it doesn't look as robotic, right? If you look at an animal, it's going to stop every single spline point. You can do a pattern, and you can do a number here, which means generate a waypoint every X number of points. So by default, I put 3. So if I go here and I generate the waypoints, and now I click on debug, you'll see the waypoints that are 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. As you can see, there's one here, one here, and one here. Here, here, and here. And now I'm going to make this a little faster. Again, time dilation 2. And now you can see that the animal's going to stop. I believe it was here. Yep. And then here. So you can have as many or as little waypoints as you want. By the way, the waypoints are literally just vectors. So you could technically add waypoints anywhere on the spline. Doesn't have to be the spline points, but the spline points are kind of the easiest way. You can change the pattern, obviously, every 2, every 3, every 4, whatever. Or you can do completely random. So if you choose random, you can give it a % chance per point, in this case like 50%. Then you can generate the waypoints. And now if I debug, you can see that it's a lot more random. It's just these 2 here, because it's calculating per point. If I generate again and I debug, you can see that now we have different points. Here, 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 and here. So now you can make it a little bit more random or flexible how you are adding these waypoints. And the animal will know if there are waypoints. So if there is a path that doesn't have a waypoint, it won't even search for waypoints, and it's actually a little bit more efficient. It'll just kind of run around. But if you add your waypoints, then it'll be looking out for that distance for the waypoints and stop as close to that waypoint as it can. So as you can see there, so a lot more flexibility when it comes to the waypoints. And the last thing I want to show is, I'm going to move this bear here all the way here, is that you can have a path that is looped. I feel that that's like a very basic requirement here. So this path is 5. So let's change this to 5 real quick. Oh. Follow path. Sorry, where is it? Follow path. And let's change this to 5, right? And it's specific, so it's only going to go in 5. And if I click play here, you can see that the animal, oh, let me just remove the waypoints here real quick. This one has waypoints. So you can see here, I'm just going to remove them, literally just clearing the array. And now when I click play, the animal is just going to go around, and when it gets to the end, it'll just turn around. So again, it depends on what you want with your path. If you want a path to be looped, then you just simply select it here, the option, and you can see that now we have a looped path, even though you're not seeing that mesh at the end. I may just fix that, it's just a visual issue here. But then when I click play, the animal will just keep going and going and going and going. That was the last thing I added. So, okay, there we go. I was going to say, hopefully it works. And there you go. So that is what I have so far. Obviously, in my opinion, a pretty big improvement on the system. And it's actually even better than what we have in the NPC manager system. It's more efficient and, in my opinion, more flexible. So I'm going to kind of move a couple of these bears around just so we can see. We'll just put 3 bears, and selecting all 3 bears, we'll do follow path, we'll do sequential, and we'll do 1, 2, 3. All right, and then we're gonna make this a little bit faster. Let's make it like a 5 just so we can see kind of what is going on here, and we'll click play here. So you can see now that the animals can use the same path. They can stop, they can keep going. So that is kind of the idea, that you'll have a bunch of paths that you're laying out where you want your animals to kind of go around. If you want to have some waypoints where they stop for a certain amount of time, you can do that. And the animals will choose the direction based on the distance between the first and last spline point. So here are some things that I want to ask you guys, because I want to know how you're going to be using this. The first one is, when you have specific, would you want the animal to stick to just the first path that it's selected, or would you want the animal to keep going through different paths, even with the same ID? So for example, this path here has path 1, but this guy here is also path 1. But if the animal chooses this path, it'll keep going on this path and ignore this one because it kind of chose this one. Would you want the animal to go from here to here because it has the same ID? Or would you say, no, that's what sequential's for, right? How would you use it? The second one is with the direction. Again, this is just a design. I could go either way. Would you like to specify the direction of the path yourself? Or would you want the animal to decide their direction based on the proximity to the ends, right? But the way that I'm doing it now. And finally, the waypoints. So here's the thing. Once I generate the waypoints for a specific path, whether it's random or sequential or all or pattern rather or whatever, every animal will use those waypoints. So in a way, there is more randomness per path, but every single animal will still use the same waypoints. Or I could move the waypoint code to the animal itself, and then each animal will generate their own waypoints per path. So that information that is here, right, this array, and this code that does random or pattern or whatever, could instead live inside each individual animal. Now that would give it even more randomness, because every bear here would have a different stopping point, which I think is a little bit more natural. But then again, you lose control, because now you cannot decide exactly where you want your animals to stop. So let's say that you're thinking like in a hunting game and you have a clearing in a forest. You may want to figure out that that's like a very natural stopping point for the animals, because hey, maybe they got to a meadow or a clearing and they're like stopping there. So right now with this method, you would have that control. But if I switch it to the animal, you would lose that control, but then gain every animal stops at their own waypoints, so to speak. So let me know what you think. Again, they're both possible. This is more about how would you use this in your games? Like, what do you think is going to be more useful for you? All right, guys, that is all I have for today. There's still more work to be done, obviously, on the pathing. This is one of the big ticket items that I had for 1.4. But even just now, with a couple of days of work, I feel that it's in pretty good shape. So please let me know what you think in the comments in the video. If you haven't joined our Discord, join Discord and give me your feedback there. Ask me any questions you want. If you have any suggestions that are not covered for 1.4, that are not on my Trello board, this is the time to give me that suggestion. I can't promise you that they'll be implemented, but I will take it into consideration, and maybe your changes will make it to the update. So thank you guys so much, and I'll talk to you in the next video.